Hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin officially began last Friday, but after a relatively quiet 2006 season, there's plenty of speculation about whether this year will return to the very active mode we saw in 2004 and 2005. And to talk about that and other issues involving the tropics, we welcome today Dr. Jenni Evans, professor of meteorology at Penn State, who specializes in tropical cyclones, specifically how they form, how they evolve, and modeling them. Welcome to Weather World.
Thanks, John. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Let's jump right in then with the question I think I get a lot on the street. People have heard the forecasts from the Colorado State team, from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of an active hurricane season. How much stock can we really put in those kinds of numbers?
Well, it's better than guessing. The people who put these forecasts together have studied a lot of historical data and have come up with some indicators that are helpful, but they're not everything. As the 2006 season showed, even though we do believe we're generally in a more active phase, we get individual years where something like an El Nino will come along and will quash the activity for that particular season.
Okay, so it's better than nothing, but folks probably shouldn't necessarily focus on the specific numbers, but rather on the idea that it's expected to be active.
Yeah, I think that you're much safer. And also an active season or an inactive season doesn't correspond directly to a landfall season. For example, Hurricane Andrew occurred in 1992, which was a very inactive season, but one Cat 5 making landfall in Miami region has people remembering that particular season.
Right. Now, after the 2005 season with Katrina and Wilma and Rita, a rancorous debate developed within the meteorological community about whether there's any kind of a link between global warming and this recent upturn in Atlantic activity. Now, how is that all shaken out?
Well, there was a WMO, a World Meteorological Organization meeting in November last year in Costa Rica, and I was present at that meeting. There were over 100 scientists from all of the countries impacted by tropical cyclones, and these were government scientists and university researchers both. And the debate there was quite vigorous, and a statement came out that said, for example, no particular season is indicative of global warming, just in the same way as no individual storm is indicative of global warming. That there is some evidence of perhaps slightly more intense storms occurring as the globe continues to warm, but that trend would be very hard to pick out of the storms that we're seeing at the moment, because it's not bigger than what we see from just year-to-year variation.
Okay.
And that it's very confusing. The people who talk about that there'll be more storms, you can make perfectly good arguments that say there could be even slightly fewer storms with a warmer world, because other things will be transporting energy around.
Okay, so still an evolving research area.
It's a big debate.
Has the funding for research into tropical cyclones increased after those 2004 and 2005 seasons?
The funding for the National Hurricane Center thankfully has increased. They've got a couple of extra forecasters on duty and some additional observational facilities and so on. In general terms, it really hasn't increased though. For the general researcher, things are pretty much the same as they were.
Okay. Now, the Hurricane Center will admit that while track forecasts of tropical storms and hurricanes have improved markedly in the last couple decades, intensity forecasts really have not. What's the biggest difficulty with getting those intensity forecasts correct?
Well, I think that the track forecast is forecasting this great big envelope of the cyclone, but when we talk about intensity, we're talking about a very tiny region of the storm, just where the strongest winds are. And in that region of the storm, the clouds are critically important to understanding the intensity. And while many aspects of the models have improved greatly, we're still limited by how we treat the clouds in the models. And so there's a big push for that. The clouds can be impacted very strongly by the oceans, and so linking ocean models to our tropical cyclone models is also critical. And a new version of the hurricane forecast model is due to come out later this year that will incorporate an active ocean and improve clouds. So hopefully that's going to get us where we need to go.
Okay, now you've actually flown into a couple hurricanes, most recently Ivan in 2004. Tell us a little bit about penetrating into the eye of a major hurricane.
Ivan was a ride. I lucked out. I had flight information. I had a flight down to Florida anyway, and Ivan was coming ashore. So I phoned an old buddy from my grad school days and said, could you get me onto a flight into Ivan? And the first one I did was the Gulfstream 4 jet, which doesn't go into the center of the storm. That was the first day. And with that false sense of security that comes from not going into the eye, the next day I said, sure, you've got a seat on the P3. I'd love to go. And it was a mission that was designed to get the most extreme observations possible to validate the satellite algorithms that we use when we can't fly into storms.
Okay.
And so we went in and out of the eye of Ivan 8 times. And each time was a ride. It was amazing. I've only ever done one of those bucking bronco horse things once. It was worse than that by orders of magnitude.
Now, we've talked a lot about hurricanes, but let's finish up. If there was one other thing about the tropics that folks that live here in the mid-latitude should know, other than that's where hurricanes come from, what is it, since your research is so much focused on the tropics?
That Pennsylvania isn't insulated from the tropics. That we get moisture streams that come up here that affect our weather through the seasons, and that we get actually tropical cyclones, hurricanes that impact Pennsylvania. For example, Ivan. Right. Ivan actually caused tens of families in Center County to be evacuated because of flooding.
Right.
And so Pennsylvania, while it's not in the tropics, is impacted by the tropics.
Okay. Jenni Evans, Professor of Meteorology at Penn State, thanks very much for stopping by this evening on Weather World.
Thanks, John.
We'll be back in a moment with more.